All right, today we're jumping into a prophecy from the book of Daniel that is just mind-blowing. It seems to lay out centuries of history with unbelievable accuracy, all leading up to a king who literally tried to pick a fight with heaven. Let's see how it all plays out. So right out of the gate, the prophecy hits us with this really dramatic image. You have this great power, this great horn, and it's shattered, not when it's weak, but at the absolute height of its strength. It's this picture of sudden collapse that just sets the tone for everything that's about to happen. And that's really the big question here, isn't it? When a giant falls, it leaves a huge power vacuum. The vision Daniel is seeing isn't just about things being destroyed. It's about what comes next, what starts to crawl out of the wreckage.
Okay, so let's start with that first big symbol, the Great Horn. Before we can understand who the attacker is, we've got to understand who it was that fell.
Now, this is where prophecy and history just lock together in this incredible way. The vision talks about a he-goat charging from the west, and that's widely identified as the Greek Empire. And that one single great horn on its head, well, historians all agree this points to its first and most legendary king, Alexander the Great. And get this, the precision here is just staggering. It wasn't a slow fizzle. The text says the horn was broken when he was strong. And sure enough, history tells us Alexander died unexpectedly at just 33 years old, right at the peak of his power. He'd conquered the known world, but couldn't beat a sudden fever. So when one man, even a great one like Alexander, suddenly disappears, it creates chaos. His massive kingdom is left without a leader. So what happened to it? Well, the prophecy tells us exactly what to expect. The vision keeps going. In place of that one great horn, 4 smaller, notable horns pop up, pointing in every direction, to the 4 winds of heaven. The single unified empire is totally gone, and now it's been replaced by division.
And just like the prophecy said, history shows Alexander's empire wasn't passed down to his son. Nope, it was carved up by his 4 top generals. You had Cassander taking Macedonia, Lysimachus grabbing Thrace, Ptolemy getting Egypt, and Seleucus taking Syria. The one massive kingdom shattered into 4 rival powers.
But the story doesn't stop with these 4 new kingdoms. The prophecy now zooms in, focusing on one of these 4 divisions. Why? Because from one of them, a new, much more sinister power is about to rise up. And here he is, the main villain of this chapter, the Little Horn. Now, it's super important that he comes from one of those 4 kingdoms we just talked about. And historically, this figure is identified as Antiochus IV Epiphanes, a guy who grabbed power in the Seleucid or Syrian part of that fractured Greek empire.
And you gotta love this little historical detail about the guy. He called himself Epiphanes, which means the illustrious, or even God manifest. But the people who actually knew him and his crazy, cruel behavior had a different nickname for him. They called him Epimanes, which means the madman. And as we're about to see, that title fit him way better.
The prophecy then tells us exactly where he focuses his ambition. He expands his power not just anywhere, but specifically toward what the Bible calls the pleasant land. And that's a crystal clear reference to the land of Israel. His attention was turning directly toward the Jewish people.
We have to be really clear here. This wasn't just another military campaign for land. Antiochus's goals were spiritual. His war wasn't just for territory. It was a direct assault on the worship of God.
I mean, listen to this language. It's incredible. The little horn grows so powerful it reaches up to the host of heaven, pulls stars down from the sky, and then just tramples all over them. So what on earth is this symbolic language actually talking about? Okay, so in this prophecy, the host and the stars aren't talking about literal angels or planets. It's symbolic language for God's people on earth, specifically the priests and the leaders who were the spiritual guides in Israel. Antiochus wasn't literally fighting stars. He was persecuting the people who represented God. And this persecution was unbelievably brutal. That poetic language about stamping on stars, well, it's grounded in a horrifying reality. Historical sources tell us that in his rage, Antiochus was responsible for the death or enslavement of up to 100,000 Jewish people. He wasn't just disagreeing with them, he was trying to wipe them out. But attacking God's people wasn't enough for this guy. His rebellion escalated. It says he magnified himself against the prince of the host. In other words, against God himself. This was the ultimate act of arrogance, a mortal king basically declaring war on the King of Heaven.
And his war on God took a very specific, ugly form. He went right for the heart of Jewish worship. First, he abolished the daily sacrifice, which was the central ritual of their faith. Then, he profaned the sanctuary, the holiest place on earth for them. And finally, in the ultimate act of blasphemy, he set up an idol of a pagan god right on the holy altar. This act became known as the Abomination of Desolation.
So this brings us to what is maybe the toughest question in this whole passage. You have this madman, Antiochus, who attacks God, persecutes his people, and trashes his temple. And he gets away with it. He succeeds. So, why?
I mean, that's a question that just hangs in the air, right? The text is very clear. He practiced and prospered. Why in the world would God allow this kind of evil to succeed, especially against his own people and his own temple?
What's so amazing is that the prophecy doesn't leave us hanging. It gives a direct and pretty sobering answer in just a few words, by reason of transgression. So Antiochus' success wasn't a sign that God was weak. It was a consequence of the people's own choices. And this is the key point. The spiritual foundation was already rotting from the inside. The high priesthood had become corrupt. It was being sold for cash to wicked men. The priests themselves were despising the temple and neglecting their duties. And a lot of the people were more than happy to abandon their own laws and heritage to adopt the trendy Greek culture. In other words, they had already cast the truth to the ground long before Antiochus showed up to stomp on it. His tyranny was allowed as a judgment on their own transgression.
But that's not where the story ends. The evil didn't last forever. In 1640 BC, a Jewish revolt led by a man named Judas Maccabeus actually succeeded. They retook Jerusalem, they cleansed the temple, and they restored the worship of God. And that incredible event, the rededication of the sanctuary, is still celebrated every single year as Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights.
And so that's what we're left with. We've just walked through a prophecy that laid out the rise and fall of Alexander the Great, the four-way split of his empire, and the specific evils of a future king, all written down centuries before any of it happened. And that forces you to ask a really big question: is history just a random chain of events, or is there a guiding hand behind it all?